Have you ever wondered how the world might have looked if the Cold War had turned hot? Welcome to a journey back in time, where tensions were high and the world was divided. The Cold War, a period of political and military tension between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, spanned from 1945 to 1991. This was not a typical war. Instead, it was a clash of ideologies, a battle between capitalism and communism. The United States, representing capitalism, believed in a free market and individual liberty. On the other hand, the Soviet Union, the beacon of communism, advocated for state control of the economy and equality among its citizens. These stark ideological differences, coupled with the immense power each nation wielded, set the stage for a conflict that didn't involve direct warfare. Instead, it was marked by proxy wars, nuclear arms races, and intense diplomatic standoffs. So began a geopolitical chess game that lasted for more than 4 decades. The seeds of the Cold War were sown in the immediate aftermath of World War II. As the world breathed a collective sigh of relief after the end of the most devastating conflict in human history, new tensions started simmering. The key players in these simmering tensions were the United States and the Soviet Union, two superpowers with diametrically opposed ideologies. The first signs of this ideological divide became apparent during the Yalta and Potsdam conferences held in 1945. Here, the Allied powers, including the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, met to negotiate terms for the end of World War II. While they agreed on the division of Germany into 4 zones of occupation, the conferences left many questions unanswered and sowed the seeds of future discord. One of the most significant disagreements concerned the future of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union wanted to establish a buffer zone of friendly communist governments to protect itself from any future Western aggression. The United States and the United Kingdom, on the other hand, were committed to the principle of self-determination and opposed the imposition of communist regimes. This disagreement culminated in what Winston Churchill famously called the Iron Curtain that descended across the continent, separating the communist East from the democratic West. The world was effectively divided into 2 ideological camps. In response to the Soviet Union's actions, President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine in 1947, pledging to support free peoples resisting subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. This was closely followed by the Marshall Plan, an economic recovery program aimed at rebuilding war-torn Europe, but also a tool to prevent the spread of communism. These actions further deepened the ideological divide, creating a world split between the democratic capitalist West and the communist East. The stage was set for a prolonged period of political and military tension that came to be known as the Cold War. As the 1950s dawned, the world was polarized, with the US and the Soviet Union vying for supremacy. As the Cold War escalated, so did the risk of a full-blown nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the space race, and the Vietnam War, 3 pivotal events that exemplify the height of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of the United States. It was a high-stakes game of political chess, with both sides making bold moves and countermoves. Eventually, the crisis ended peacefully, with the Soviets agreeing to remove their missiles from Cuba, in exchange for the US promising not to invade the island nation. Meanwhile, the space race was another arena where the superpowers competed. It wasn't just about who could get to the moon first. It was about technological superiority and ideological triumph. The Soviets took an early lead with the launch of Sputnik in 1957, but the United States caught up and eventually won the race by landing a man on the moon in 1969. This competition spurred on advancements in technology and science, but it also fueled the arms race and increased Cold War tensions. Then came the Vietnam War, a proxy conflict that pitted the communist North, supported by the Soviet Union and China, against the South, backed by the United States. It was a bloody and brutal war that lasted 2 decades and deeply divided the American public. The war ended in 1975 with the fall of Saigon to the communists, marking a significant setback for the US. These events brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, but they also exposed the limitations and costs of this global confrontation. The fear of mutual destruction and the realization of the need for coexistence led to a period of détente, or easing of tensions. By the late 1970s, both sides were looking for ways to ease tensions. The world had seen the height of the Cold War, and now it was time for a step back from the edge of catastrophe. The 1980s brought dramatic changes that led to the end of the Cold War. One of the key figures who played a role in this dramatic shift was Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union from 1985 until its dissolution. Gorbachev introduced two crucial policies: glasnost, which means openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Glasnost allowed for more freedom of speech and transparency in government activities, a stark contrast to the previous era of secrecy and closed doors. Meanwhile, perestroika aimed at economic restructuring, attempting to infuse elements of capitalism into the socialist economy. These policies, while well-intentioned, caused unrest and economic instability within the Soviet Union, leading to a loss of faith in the communist system. Additionally, a significant symbolic event took place in 1989 that echoed across the world: the fall of the Berlin Wall. This concrete barrier had divided East and West Berlin since 1961, a direct manifestation of the political and ideological divide of the Cold War. Its demolition marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union and was a visible sign that the Cold War was drawing to a close. Finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. The 15 constituent republics, including Russia, became independent countries, marking the official end of the Cold War. This dissolution signified a massive shift in global politics and marked the beginning of a new era. In 1991, the Cold War officially ended, marking a new era in world history. The Cold War was a crucial period in history that shaped the world we know today. It all began with the clash of ideologies, escalating into a formidable standoff between superpowers. The tension reached its peak before the eventual end, marking a significant turn in global politics. As we look back, it's clear that the lessons learned from this era are intensely valuable. It reminds us that true victory isn't about military might, but about winning hearts and minds. The Cold War, a war of ideologies, wasn't won on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of people.